Hi there. Welcome to the first episode of Beyond a Reasonable Stout. I'm Jonathan Nobles. I've been an immigration attorney for the past several years, working with immigrants and refugees and others in our judicial system. And this show combines two things that I really enjoy: critiquing the government and enjoying a really good craft beer. So, the way this is going to work is pretty simple. Each episode, we're going to look at a particular type of beer. And once we kind of get into the episode, you'll understand what I mean. But we're going to look at a type of beer and we're going to pair it with a topic that kind of fits the type of beer we're talking about. It might be heavy, it might be complicated, it might be light, but you'll see where the metaphor fits in. So we're just going to have some fun with it. And what we're trying to do here is we really want to think about a particular topic that has to do with a governmental system, if it's working, why it's working, and who it's working for. So that's what we're going to be doing. So again, since this is our first episode, we should probably talk about some things that this show isn't. So one thing we're not going to do is I'm not going to go off on angry rants. Now I could if I wanted to. I'm really good at that, but that's not what this is about. We're also I'm not going to throw out a bunch of hot takes or earth-shattering conclusions. That's not what this is about either. In fact, when we're done, if I've done my job correctly, you're probably going to leave with more questions than answers. But that's okay, because again, the goal is for us to think. Another thing this isn't is this is not a political show. It's not partisan. When we talk about these systems, what we're talking about are things that, as far as I'm concerned, aren't political issues. Whether a system is working or not has really nothing to do with what one particular side of the political spectrum thinks. There may be good ideas, bad ideas on either side, but what we want to look at is what's actually working, again, why it's working, and who it's working for. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get into some pretty complicated topics, sometimes some heavy topics, sometimes lighter topics, but ultimately, again, we're probably going to leave with more questions than answers, but that's okay, because topics like this typically don't have easy answers. If people tell you they do, they're probably making stuff up. And so we want to be honest. We want to get beyond the headlines. We want to get beyond the talking heads and really talk about what's going on. So you understand what I'm talking about. Let's actually talk about the beer. So what we're actually looking at for this particular episode, this is an IPA. And for those who may not be as familiar with beer parlance, it's an India Pale Ale. Fun fact, very brief history lesson. The India Pale Ale comes from Great Britain in the 18th century. They would brew this and make it so that it would last throughout the long voyages from England to India, hence the name. And they would actually brew it with more hops than you would normally see in a domestic beer, just because that acted as a kind of preservative. So that's what gives the IPA its really hoppy, bitter, complicated flavor. And IPAs are bitter. They're complicated. And that's by design. They're made to be that way. And because of that, they're not for everybody. Not everybody likes them. In fact, it's really more of an acquired taste. Most people, if you enjoy beer, you're not on the fence about an IPA. You either like it or you don't like it. And if you don't like it, you just look at people like me who do and say, what the hell are you drinking? I mean, it could vary, and this is coming from a person who likes it. It could very easily be described as carbonated grapefruit juice that's gone bad. So why in the world are we drinking it? But again, the bitterness and the complexity are something that you just kind of get used to. Kind of the same way we get used to bitterness and complexity in certain governmental systems, especially the one we're going to talk about today, which is the US immigration system. And I just heard several people hit the back button, find the latest Joe Rogan, because nobody wants to talk about this. Either that or we want to talk about it incessantly. Immigration's become the new, we don't talk about it, and if we do, we know it's going to cause trouble because everybody has an opinion and it's out there everywhere. You can't get past it, especially in the environment we're in now. So we need to talk about what's going on, but we want to get past all of that. This is good, this is bad. We actually want to talk about the immigration system itself, why we have it, what it does, if it's working, and who it's working for. So let's talk about why we have an immigration system to begin with. And you may think, well, of course we need an immigration system. But if you think about why, it's because from the beginning, from the founding of our country, immigrants have always played a major part. That's not a hot take. That's just reality. Immigrants have always been a huge part of our culture. Immigrants have been a huge part of our economy. Now, there's a lot to unpack there too, but we're going to save that for a later episode. But suffice to say, and again, I think this is it's just reality. It's not liberal or conservative or anything else. Immigrants have always been a huge part of our culture, a huge part of our economy. And so that's something that in general as a society we have accepted. And because of that, it's also a fact that we have to have a system to be able to control that. You know, it's just a fact that there are people who would come to our country and want to do us harm. Now, is that everybody? Absolutely not. But it's true. It happens. We can look throughout history and see where it's happened. So we have to have some sort of system to where we're doing reasonable work to make sure that we can keep ourselves safe. Emphasis on the word reasonable, because that's always important. But we have to have that. Again, that's not really a hot take. That's not an opinion. That's just reality. You look at past history, and there has to be some sort of process to make sure we know who's coming in and who's not. Kind of like the bouncer at the door checking IDs to make sure that the wrong people don't get into the club. It's the same kind of thing. Now, the problem with that is, what kind of system do we have? We all agree, I think we all agree we need a system of some sort. Very few people would argue with that. Question is, what kind of system do we have, and is it working as intended? If it's not working as intended, things need to change. But if it is working as intended, who's it working for? And what do we do about that? So let's talk about how the immigration system works in general. And I could spend hours. I won't do that to you, but just at a very high level, we'll talk about how this works. Because a lot of people don't know. They just kind of assume people come in, people leave, but there's a lot more to it than that. So a lot of different pathways that people can take to come to the US. All of them are difficult. None of them are fast. So it's always going to be difficult to some degree for people to come to the US. You could come as the family member of a US citizen. If you come from a certain country and you've been persecuted, you can apply for asylum, or you can come as a refugee, which is kind of the same thing, but there's a few nuances there. You can come if you have an employer who's willing to sponsor you and you get a job in the US, you can come that way. So there are lots of different ways to do it. But again, not all of them are easy, and they do take some time. There are also different risk profiles. And what I mean by that is, you can be considered to be dangerous just because you come from a certain country. Are you dangerous? Probably not. But because you're coming from a country that is considered dangerous for one reason or another, there's a good chance, and we're seeing this now, there is a good chance that you're either not going to be allowed to come here, or even if you qualify and you apply for something, that your application is just going to languish because of where you're from and because of the assumptions that are being made. If you come from a different country, maybe you're not considered dangerous, but maybe the government says, you know what, we've got too many people from your country here already, and we only have a certain number of visas for you, so you're going to have to wait. Again, these are just the realities of the system. These are not opinions. It's just the way the system works. You might have to wait. There are also timing issues. So, for example, if you are the immediate relative of a U.S. citizen, it's still not going to be fast that you get here, but there's generally going to be a visa available for you. Now, if you are a more distant relative, say a sibling of a US citizen, you might have to wait longer. Or if you are even the wife or husband or young child of a green card holder, you're still eligible, but you just kind of have to wait longer because there are only a certain number of visas available. So you could have to wait uh, depending on what classification you fall into or what you're applying for. And then there's the whole issue of control or lack of control. Because once you file that application, and I hear this all the time, I have people, is there anything you can do to make it go faster? And usually the answer is no, there's not. I mean, all we can do is we can file the paperwork, we provide as much evidence as possible, we do it to the best of our ability, but then we have no control over it at that point. And it can go relatively quickly. It can take a while. And of course, there are a lot of reasons for that. It could be because maybe, again, because of where you're from or your background, there might be more things that have to be looked into and you have to be more thoroughly vetted. Or frankly, it could be because it gets buried on somebody's desk. And that's just the nature of bureaucracy. And that happens in government systems, that happens in large private systems. It can happen in small businesses, quite frankly. Something just doesn't get moved along the way it's supposed to. But again, the person who's actually applying has no control over that. So there is definitely that lack of control. So we have this system, again, like our beer, it's bitter because people, it's frustrating having to wait and you can't do anything about it because it's very, very complex and it's frustrating. But after a while, kind of like me with an IPA, after a while, you accept the bitterness and the complexity and you just kind of see it as normal. And, you know, that can that can really cause problems. I mean, again, I love a good IPA, but that doesn't mean that they're for everybody, and it doesn't mean that it works for everybody. It just means that I'm okay with the complexity. I understand it. I like it. And I have options. And other people have options, but if you're in a system where you don't have options and you're having to deal with that amount of complexity and it's causing that much frustration, that can be a problem. So frankly, immigrants have to accept this system. If you want to come to the US, this is a system you have to accept because there's really no other way to do it. So, those of us who aren't immigrants, those of us who are US citizens, or those of us who are allowed to be here for whatever reason, most of us fall into one of two categories. And again, these are not political statements. This is just the reality of the camps that people fall into. And I think again, when it comes to this particular topic, there really isn't a middle ground at this point. There just isn't. It's very polarizing. So people fall into one camp or another. So you've got some people who do see the system as overly complex and it needs to be simplified. There's just too much going on. It's too difficult. Let's streamline things. And then you've got another group that says, no, the complexity is a good thing. It's actually working the way it's supposed to because it's doing its job. The gatekeepers are in place. They're keeping what they would consider to be the right people out, or the wrong people out, I should say, and the right people in. And so things are good. So then it becomes if you feel like the system is working the way it's supposed to, then it becomes a matter of enforcement. So now we get to what we're seeing now with what we're seeing in the news. And again, I could spend a ton of time talking about what's going on in places like Minneapolis and Chicago and DC and even my home state of North Carolina. It's happening everywhere. But we're not going to do that. What I'd like to do is really take a step beyond that and talk about why this level of enforcement seems to be okay. Because if people think this is fine, then yeah, it's doing its job. Now, maybe people might disagree with the level of enforcement in terms of, or I should say, the tactics of enforcement. Not necessarily the level of enforcement, but some people, yeah, it's doing its job, but the tactics need to change. But still kind of in that camp of, yeah, things are fine. We don't really need any type of reform. We just need to make sure that we keep doing what we're doing, or maybe even take it a step further, as opposed to the system needs to change. All right, time for a quick break. We want to say thank you for watching. And if what we're talking about is really resonating with you and it's making you think, then of course that means we're doing our job, but it also means you're someone we might want to talk to. Right now, we're looking for episode sponsors and product sponsors. So if you're interested, we'd love to hear from you. Just drop us a message at the email below. Now let's get back to the episode. But you've got, there are a lot of things going around that people say. And I just want, again, the whole point of this is not to tell you if you're right or if you're wrong. Again, just as a reminder, the whole idea is we want to think through this whole situation and really get beyond all the hype and all the talking points and all the rhetoric. So, but having said that, there are some things that I hear and that you probably hear as well, and you may have clocked them as, wait a second, that might not sound right, or you may just accept them. You may even say them. But I want to take a look at a few things that are just kind of considered to be common knowledge and just examine those to see if they make sense. So, for example, one thing that I hear all the time, and you probably do as well, well, they should just come here the right way. If people would just come the right way, there wouldn't be any problem. Question: which right way are you talking about? Because as I said before, there are several different ways to get here. And the problem is there are some people who don't really qualify for any of them. So does that mean they just don't have the right to be here? Or, and there are people, and these are people that I work with all the time, that they do qualify for one of those pathways, and they have tried and tried and tried to get here through that lawful pathway, done everything right, paid the fees, which are pretty steep, by the way. Whether you're talking about, the actual governmental fees, or you're talking about an attorney fee, so or paying someone to help you, the fees are steep. So there's a lot of sacrifice going on, and people are exhausted. They have tried and tried and tried, and they're still not getting anywhere. And again, going back to some of these countries where you're kind of automatically assumed to be dangerous, and frankly, that's a lot of the people that I work with. I basically have to tell them, yes, we can do this, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. It's going to take longer than it normally would because of where you're from and what our government says about where you're from. Again, those are just the facts. So coming the right way, there's really there's a lot more to it than just a simple statement. There's not a right way and a wrong way. It's like our IPA. It's pretty complex. The second thing people say is, oh, well, they're probably all just criminals. And maybe that's an oversimplification. So maybe not all criminals, but people would say, oh, all these people are coming here to commit crime. I mean, we hear it. There are no facts, no legitimate facts that I've seen that support the idea that immigrants are more likely to commit violent crimes or even nonviolent crimes than U.S. citizens. They just don't exist. People talk about drugs. Oh, well, people, all the drugs that are coming in, the vast majority of the drugs that are coming in over, especially the southern border, probably true with the northern border as well, although you don't see as much coming in, but definitely the drugs that are coming into the US, the vast majority of them are coming in through lawful ports of entry, which means that citizens are most likely bringing them in. It's not immigrants that are doing it. So just labeling everyone as a criminal just because they're coming in from another country, it's a little bit disingenuous. So you really have to kind of think that one through. The third one is kind of along the same lines, but this one, there's a lot to unpack here when people say, oh, they're all just a bunch of illegals. Number one, can a person really be illegal? I mean, that's a question. So can that be like their actual part of their personality, their designation, if you will, how they're identified? They are illegal. Well, yeah, that's something you really have to think through. But then also, admittedly, I think a lot of times what people mean is, in addition to the whole they're committing crimes thing, or maybe not even that, but they're saying, okay, just the act that they came into the US without a visa makes them illegal. Well, a couple of problems with that too. One is that most border crossings, if you're crossing into the US without a visa, yes, that is against the law, but it's not a crime. It's usually a civil infraction. Which again, I mean, we could argue the validity of that, but it's not usually what people think. Oh, they committed a crime by coming here. Well, no, just coming here is not committing a crime. It's usually a civil infraction. Secondly, a lot of people that come here come to the US and they are coming from a country where they're persecuted and they're claiming asylum. Either they have either they've come to the US with some type of temporary benefit and then they're applying for asylum while they're here, or you don't see this now, but several years ago there were, and this of course has been controversial, but you would have people who would come to the border, surrender themselves at a port of entry. They don't sneak in. They're surrendering themselves at a port of entry and applying for asylum at that point. That's not illegal. Under both US and international law, that is perfectly legal. So a blanket assumption that if a person is here without a visa, that they are automatically an illegal, that's another one that we might really want to think through and think about the terminology that we're using, because words do have meaning and terms matter, and what we call people, it's really important, and it's important that we frame these again. What we're talking about is not trying to score political points. We just want to think about these things in terms of what's actually happening, and that's what's happening. So you have a lot of people who are assumed to be illegal and they're just not. It's just not as simple as many people would like to believe. So then you look at the human cost. Again, I see it every day with the people that I work with others. There's exhaustion, there's frustration, there's just this sense of I don't know what else to do. In some cases, quite frankly, there are people who, well, I would say in the majority of cases, there's a lot of sacrifice to get here. And sometimes that sacrifice isn't self-serving sacrifice. You've got people who actually sacrificed on behalf of the US, and that's something we may touch on at a later point, but just suffice to say, there are a lot of people in the US here who actually sacrificed in their home country on behalf of the US, assuming, and understandably so, assuming that the US would in turn take care of them. And that's just not happening. So regardless of the situation, it may be someone who, yes, that we have tried everything, they have tried everything, and they have exhausted all their options and they don't know what else to do. That's still a person. That's still a human being. And I think that's the thing that we probably need to really step back from and look at the most, is what is the effect that this system is having on actual people, regardless of where they're from, regardless of what they've done, regardless of how they got here. There's a real human element involved, and there's human suffering involved. I mean, people are suffering, and we have to think about whether this is the system that's doing it to them and why. Because if the system is this bitter and this complex by design, and it's doing its job, as far as the people who are in charge of the system now are, that's if that's what they're saying, and that's what a lot of people in the US are saying, that the system is doing its job. Well, who's it benefiting? What does that mean? And it may be benefiting some, but there's a whole other group of people on the other side that it's not benefiting. So that's really what we need to look at. So that brings us back to our IPA. Again, it's bitter, it's complex, it's by design. Those aren't bugs, those are features. And there are a lot of us, like I said, who have just we embrace that. We enjoy that. I mean, this is my favorite kind of beer, bar none. That's why I started with it. Well, that and so I could talk about the system, but at the same time, this is my favorite. But honestly, I understand why it's not for everybody. And if people want to criticize it, I'm totally okay with that. I mean, there are people that look at me when I drink this, it's like, how in the world? And I get it because it's very exclusionary. You either like it or you don't. It either works for you or it doesn't. And when it comes to beverages, that's perfectly fine because you have plenty of options. You don't have to drink IPAs. If you like beer, you can drink stouts, you can drink lagers, you can drink pilsners, you can drink sours. There's all kinds of things. If you don't like beer, you can drink wine, you can drink liquor, you can drink soda, you can drink coffee. There's just so many choices out there. You're not locked in. So the exclusivity isn't a problem. You don't like it, it's okay. It's not for you. But when we're talking about a system like our immigration system that's just as bitter, just as complex, and just as frustrating, but the people that are stuck in it have no alternative. That's what they're stuck in. That's when we have to start asking ourselves if we're okay with that. And if you are, I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm just saying I think it's important if you've never thought about this, and that's kind of the whole point to this exercise. I'd like to think that there are a lot of people out there who just haven't taken the time to think this through. Maybe it just never occurred to you. Maybe it hasn't hit you personally, and that's okay. But what I'm challenging you to do is to really just think it through. Think about the system itself, what it's doing, who it's affecting, if it's doing its job. And if you come away from that saying, okay, yeah, this is fine, I'm okay with it, then I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. But I think that it's really important if you're going to hold that kind of opinion to really think it through and have reasons for why you believe that. Because I'm here to tell you that regardless of what you think, there are people out there who are really suffering and languishing within this system. And there are a lot of people who aren't okay with that. And so if you're not okay with that, now's the time to start thinking, okay, what can we do about it? So thank you for watching the inaugural episode. Next week, we're going to be changing gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about stouts. Stouts are heavy. So we're going to be talking about a little heavier topic. We're going to be talking about the criminal justice system. And if you thought this was fun, just wait until we get into that one. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Jonathan Nobles, and we'll see you next time.